Here at The Rebel, we like to bring you the other side of the climate debate, the one that the others pretend doesn't exist, the one that they say is a consensus of 99.99% of scientists all agree with them. No, that's not the case. Tom Harris is the executive director of, help me with this, Tom?
The International Climate Science Coalition.
All right, but you've also put out this, there's several editions, the Non-Governmental International Panel on Climate Change report. It's always called Climate Change Reconsidered. You're joining me today because you take issue with something that our state broadcaster, CBC, has done related to a poll that showed Canadians don't buy man-made global warming quite the way they'd have you believe. Now, I'm not going to sit here and claim that this poll showed that Canadians don't believe in it at all, but they don't believe that this is the sole cause, and yet CBC, what did they do with this poll? Why is this a story?
Yeah.
Why are you complaining to the Ombudsman?
Well, I think it's first of all important to realize that some polls are what you call push polls. In other words, the people who design the poll want to have a certain result, and as a consequence, they ask questions that are, in fact, leading questions or deceptive questions. You see, this poll was put out February 15th, and I'm almost certain this was put out just to give cover to the federal provincial leaders who were meeting in Vancouver to work about climate change. I mean, people like Christy Clark, as a result of this poll, were saying, oh, Canadians want us to take action. But is that really true? First of all, the poll is called The Distribution of Climate Change Public Opinion in Canada, and it was put out by the University of Montreal, researchers, and also 3 American universities. Now,
so just to be clear, this is an academic poll. It wasn't a media poll. This was done by academics. Did it follow usual scientific polling patterns?
Well, not really, because look, here's the first question. From what you've read and heard, is there solid evidence that the average temperature on Earth has been getting warmer over the past 4 decades? Now, of course, that's a silly question because temperatures don't get warmer. They either increase or decrease. I mean, the planet might get warmer. But if you ignore that, silly adolescent point of it, this is a rigged question because they're saying average temperature for the past 4 decades. Okay, now that's really deceptive. Every scientist knows that it's in fact warmed over the past 4 decades. But if you choose other time intervals, you get completely different answers. For example, it's warm since 16,000 years ago, and it's a good thing, or we'd have, 2 miles of ice over our head right here. It's cooled, though, since 10,000 years ago, which was the warmest time period in what's called the Holocene, the period since the last ice age. It's also cooled since the Roman warm period around 2,000 years ago. It's neither warm nor cooled since 700 years ago. It's warmed in the last 40 years. Yes, we all agree, but not in the last 19. Now, those last 2 intervals, 40 years and 19, they're not statistically significant, okay? We have to look at longer-term trends. And in fact, that's why that is a push poll. So we also have to ask, what is the real question that has to relate to the climate debate? It's not, has it warmed or, is CO2 causing warming? The real question is this, and this is the question that is virtually never asked in the polls. The real question is, do you believe that emissions of carbon dioxide from human activities will, in the foreseeable future, cause dangerous global warming and other climate change problems? Now, there's 3 elements to that question that are really important to get. First of all, you have to call it carbon dioxide, okay? Because greenhouse gases, the main greenhouse gas is water vapor. And if we were trying to lower greenhouse gas emissions, then we should drain all our reservoirs. Well, it's not about that. It's about carbon dioxide, okay? So that's the first thing. The second thing, you have to ask them, do you think it will be dangerous in the future, okay? Because we've had 150 years of rising CO2, and of course temperature rise has been trivial. It's been 0.8 degrees. There's nothing dangerous that's happened to date. So really we're talking about the future. And we also have to ask them, very important question, do you think it's going to be dangerous global warming? Because if it's just a degree or something, I mean, so what? It's not worth public policy issues. So they don't ask this, the most important question. So that's in one way that it's a push poll. The other way is this. They say another way to lower greenhouse gas emissions is to increase taxes on carbon-based fuels. Well, no, you would definitely increase prices for carbon-based fuels, but
and you would increase government revenue.
Yeah, but you wouldn't necessarily lower greenhouse gas emissions because people still have to drive to work in the middle of the winter. They still have to heat their homes. So that is also very much a push poll question. But Brian, the amazing thing is that even though this poll was a push poll, here's the results. 56% of Canadians disagreed with the statement that Earth was getting warmer mostly because of human activities. Okay, more than half. And in fact, if you ask the question a little differently, is the Earth getting warmer partly or mostly because of human activities? Almost 40% of Canadians said no, it wasn't even partly because of human activities. So this, of course, doesn't meet the narrative. And it's interesting that the CBC, when they initially reported on this on their website, they actually said, you know, Canadians don't support climate change or whatever. And they actually edited it later because the researchers complained. But
they jumped in and changed headlines and stories to fit the narrative, didn't they?
They even changed the quotes. You know, I guess they must have called the people back and said, "Uh-oh, that quote doesn't fit with our narrative." You know, so but here's where my involvement started. About noon that day, when the CBC first published the article, obviously trying to push our leaders into having greenhouse gas emission reductions, carbon dioxide, I was contacted to go on local radio show programs across Canada. And here's the question. The CBC in Toronto, they said they wanted me to discuss how scientists and educators were falling short, as they say, and I'm reading it right here, in popularizing the point of view that the CBC supports. They also asked me to talk about how they could do better in informing public opinion. Now, it doesn't seem to occur to them that maybe public opinion is substantiated by the fact that the science doesn't support the CBC's point of view. So it was a very...
We've had, as you point out, no warming, and it's just about 19 years now.
Yeah, and in fact, the work you're doing on trying to get a carbon tax stopped because of these, you know, even the alarmists are saying this now. I mean, that's really excellent work, Brian. But anyway, they bumped me at the last minute because supposedly they got a hold of one of the researchers to do the interview, and or maybe they found out what I was going to say. So I sent them a list and I explained to them, look, this poll is a push poll. It's really very biased. It doesn't mean anything. It's not asking the right question. So, I mean, I hope you bring that up. And now this was hours before the CBC Vancouver radio interview, which occurred, you know, several hours later because it's on the coast. But in fact, they never transferred the information to the hosts who were conducting the interview. So the interview in Vancouver, and I presume the same across Canada, was very much a powder puff type interview, you know, a cheerleading type thing. And none of these hard questions were brought up. So
Well, Tom, have you done CBC syndicated before?
Yeah.
Where you go on across the country, station after station?
No, I never did that before.
Let me just fill you in. This is from people that I know who work and have worked at CBC. They are given a list of questions to ask, and the person just sits there at a CBC studio somewhere, and they're asked the same question in 10 different markets, but the questions are all pre-prepared by CBC producers.
Wow.
So you don't wait for the host in one city to ask a tough question. If there's a tough question, they're getting it in every single city. And they just decided to punt and not bother asking tough questions in any city.
Yeah, so in fact, it's probably not just Vancouver on the coast, the radio station out there. It's probably all the radio stations across Canada who gave them a pass, who didn't actually ask these questions. So I actually called the Vancouver producer and I said, did you see all these issues about the poll? Because I gave it to the people in Toronto to be shared with the interviewers. And she said, no, we never saw it. So in fact, the CBC in Toronto blocked they didn't share this information. So
you've made a complaint to the Ombudsman.
Yeah, that's right. And I told her point blank, I said, here's where it's violating the CBC policy book. And she wrote back and she said, oh, well, editorial judgment about what research is done or who is approached is generally beyond the mandate of this office. I said, but your point of view, I mean, CBC's job, and she told me right in the letter, she said that this is Esther Enkin, who's the current ombudsman of the CBC, she said in her email to me that she had a mandate to determine whether information content the CBC has produced fully respects CBC journalism policies. So I sent her several of the CBC journalism policies, and here's one. The science and health part. It has a subtitle called Implications and Validity of the Results of Scientific Research. It says, we take care to understand properly and reflect the true implications of medical or scientific study results that we obtain, especially those involving statistical data. So I sent this back to her. I said, well, they didn't do it. Here are the reasons they didn't involve it. They didn't transfer it. And, as you say, it's almost certain this occurred across the country. So back and forth it went. Me providing where they violated their policy book, and Enkin saying, oh, tell me where they violated their policy book. So I went back and forth. I eventually gave up and said, look, I'm going to publicize this because it's so clear that they're violating their policy book that you're just not going to investigate it. So she's not doing her job. It's pretty clear. And it reminds me so much, Brian, if I can just take a minute and tell you what happened in the year 2000 when I started to go after the CBC on the climate issue. I wrote to the CBC president and said, look, you keep saying there's a consensus of scientists who agree that we are causing dangerous climate change as a result of CO2 emissions. Can you show me evidence for that? Because, of course, a lot of the polls, they ask completely irrelevant questions of scientists. And finally, the CBC president assigned the Ombudsman, who was David Bazet, who's now passed away, the job of actually answering my question. And 10 weeks later, I got a 10-page answer. I thought, wow, this is great. He's done a lot of research. And he said, this fully supports our idea that scientists agree with our position. So I read through the report. Oh, that's interesting. They haven't interviewed a single scientist or talked to a single scientific organization or even cited them. What he had done is he had showed in 10 pages of very detailed documentation that other media agreed with the CBC. So there was a consensus in the media.
Well, yeah, that's why we call them the consensus media, Tom, or the consensus or the media party. There is an agenda being driven. Let me end with this because we'll run out of time shortly. Is this idea that there is the consensus? Well, some of those people in on the consensus, such as Michael Mann, the inventor of the hockey stick graph, have agreed, hey, guys, it's not warming as fast as we said it would. It's not working out the way we said. There's this big study. It's funded in part by the Canadian government because it's the University of Victoria and the Climate Change Modeling and Analysis Center, I believe is the name. John Fife is the scientist. That has not been covered in Canadian media.
You're right, except for you, and you've done a great job on that. The thing is, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration in the U.S. said if there was 15 years without significant warming, then there was something seriously wrong with the models that are driving the whole climate scare. It's now 19 years, and they're still not reevaluating it.
Well, shocking. I guess we could say it's shocking, but are you really shocked anymore that that people are burying their heads in the sand?
No, well, thank God for the rebel, because the CBC are not following their own policy book.
Tom Harris, thanks so much.
Okay, thanks, Brian.